Why hello you lovely little pecknecks, my name is Noa Lee, and A Hat in Time is another one of those games that I've been looking forward to for a very long time, and much like Cuphead, I'm happy to say that it's well worth the wait. Kickstarted and developed by Danish game company Gears for Breakfast, A Hat in Time follows the hijinks of Hat Kid, a space-traveling girl on her way home. About halfway back to her home planet, Hat Kid hears a mysterious knock on her spaceship's door, and after going to investigate, finds a strange member of the local planet's mafia looking to collect. The mafia man forces his way in, and apparently not understanding how space works, gets immediately sucked back to the planet's surface, taking Hat Kid and all of her ship's fuel, these little timepiece thingies, with him. The timepieces reign over the planet, and now it's up to Hat Kid to track them all down in order to refuel her ship and return home. With that, we have our setup, and what follows is one of the most charming and enjoyable adventures I've had in a long time. On the surface, A Hat in Time is probably most reminiscent of Super Mario Sunshine, complete with those cool introductions to each act and special stages floating about in another dimension. Though I'm not really sure why everything in these levels is constructed from cookies and icebreakers mints, but come to think of it, Mario's were made from toy blocks and watermelons, so I don't know. However, if you're not too keen on the Nintendo interpretation of platforming in 3D space, never fear, because there's also a good mix of Banjo-Kazooie, Psychonauts, and even a hint of Rayman 2 in there for good measure, though that last one might just be because of the large plums that are everywhere. Like, seriously, what's up with these things? Hat Kid herself is one of, if not the, most adorable protagonists I've ever played in a game. From her various outfits and hats to her facial expressions and mannerisms to the few words and noises she makes and the way she interacts with other characters, you can tell that a lot of time and passion went into making sure that she's an absolute joy to step into the role of. Though it isn't just the way that Hat Kid acts that makes her fun to play as, because the developers have also gone to great lengths to make sure that simply moving around is fun to do as well. Hat Kid moves at a fair pace and has the ability to double jump as well as kick off of walls, climb up obstacles, and dive forward with a burst of speed. Her primary attack involves hitting the crap out of things with her umbrella, which thankfully has a decent range and a quick swing, so you can deal damage without having to worry too much about taking a hit yourself. She also has this funky homing attack which can be initiated whenever you see a button prompt over an enemy's head. The developers have also put a great deal of thought and effort into the camera and how it functions, understanding that one of the greatest banes of moving about in 3D space is having a camera that's constantly getting in the player's way. A Hat in Time attempts to avoid these pitfalls by having a camera that performs complex calculations behind the scenes to, in theory, determine the optimal viewing angle for what the player is trying to accomplish. And it works surprisingly well. Though, personally, I ended up turning it off because I'm an old hand at 3D platformers, and because occasionally the camera would suddenly spin to a position I didn't want and cause me to miss my jump, but to be fair, that only seemed to happen when I tried to do some speedrunnery trick or exploit. And if this happened to be the first game in the genre I've ever played, I think I would have found the predictive camera to be extremely helpful. That's about it for the basics, and honestly, after years of playing other 3D platformers, mostly Banjo-Kazooie and Mario, I was initially worried I'd get bored with the simplistic moveset and lack of upgrades, but after beating the game and starting a second playthrough, I'm blown away by just how much complexity can be achieved from such a small pool of maneuvers. To begin with, Hat Kid's moveset may be simple, but I'd argue that it's far more elegant than Banjo's or Mario's ever has been, and I can honestly say that I don't think I've ever played a 3D platformer that controls nearly as well as this game. Or any game for that matter. Like, seriously, these controls are about as close to perfection as I've ever seen. Damn. For one thing, the developers seem to understand the biggest hurdle that separates a good 3D platformer from a bad one, and that's the problem of actually jumping from platform to platform. Hat Kid's double jump makes it so that if you jump to a platform and miscalculate, you can quickly perform a second jump in midair to correct your trajectory. Mario 64 is no doubt a revolutionary game, don't get me wrong, but if you go back and play it nowadays, you might be surprised just how difficult it can be to jump from platform to platform without a secondary ability to fine-tune your landing. Miss a jump in that game and it's tough titty, kid, better try again, which is one reason why we see the inclusion of the hover nozzle in Super Mario Sunshine and the spin jump in Galaxies 1 and 2. In these games, you can perform a regular jump to take you 90% of the way there, and then use another ability to adjust your landing, and we see a similar ability in Banjo-Kazooie with the feathery flap or the funny helicoptery tail thing in Conker's Bad Fur Day. But A Hat in Time takes this a step further by giving Hat Kid the ability to run up walls and pull herself onto a ledge, so even if you miss after a double jump, the game still gives you an opportunity to reach your desired destination. This has the effect of always keeping the flow of the game going. Unlike other 3D platformers whose pacing can come to a dead stop if you miss a platform and have to backtrack a ways in order to try again, A Hat in Time does everything it can to make simply moving about its world as intuitive and as seamless as possible. And I don't know about you, but I found myself using the dash cancel maneuver all the time to reach faraway platforms or just dial in where I wanted to land. I'd find myself running to the edge of a platform, jumping once and then again before diving as far as I could, and then canceling that dive at just the right moment to land with grace or quickly walk up a wall to hoist hoist myself up. And let me tell you, this never stops feeling amazing. It's so simple to pull off, yet each time I do it, I feel like I'm exploiting the game, like I'm a world-class speedrunner or something. Though, if I had a criticism of the moveset, it would have to be that the no bonk badge that you buy from this creepy chap should have been part of the base moveset rather than being a separate equipable item that eats up a badge slot. This item makes it so that you no longer bonk off a wall when diving into one and instead run up it like you would if you were to jump into it. Similarly, around the halfway point, you get a badge that allows you to grapple onto hooks and zip lines, and again, I think this should have been handled in a different way. Like, maybe instead of having to equip a separate badge, you instead get an upgrade to your umbrella. You could even take it a step further and make it so that the new umbrella gives you more range to your attack, seeing as you now have a chain built into the handle, and you also be able to have something else to equip since they went to the trouble of including a weapon selection on your equipment screen, even though you never actually get any other weapons. Though, ultimately, these are minor complaints that, at least for me, weren't really all that noticeable, especially since I only rarely found a need to equip a badge that wasn't of the no bonk, magnet, or hookshot variety. And besides, Hackett's elegant moveset is more than enough to handle anything the game throws your way, and it's clear that each level was also meticulously designed to complement this form of movement, as well as to make it feel more robust than it actually is. To begin with, the game is broken up into only 4 worlds, or chapters, and believe it or not, each one's better than the last. Now, when I first heard that this game only had 4 worlds and they were all fairly large, I instantly had flashbacks of Yooka-Laylee's large and repetitive stages and worried that the developers might end up filling these worlds with repeated mechanics and redundant tasks, or that they'd be big, empty, and boring. But color me impressed, because I don't think that there was a similar scenario, repeated gimmick, or dull moment anywhere to be found in this game, and that's awesome. Anyway, Chapter 1 takes place in Mafia Town, an island city that's been taken over by the Mafia. Duh. This level's designed in a sort of upside-down funnel shape with buildings, roads, and various construction projects intertwined and connecting to one another, with the Mafia's headquarters at the top resting on a gigantic geyser. This level is densely packed and full of little tasks to accomplish and characters to interact with, but it can be a little bit confusing to navigate at first. Thankfully though, the first few acts of this stage do a good job in both teaching you the ins and outs of movement as well as the layout of the world. Most acts of each chapter also start you in a different location of the level, which encourages exploration as well as reducing the amount of time you'll be treading the same ground, and this is a trend that continues throughout the game. Mafia Town sort of acts as a tutorial level, both in the way that it teaches the player the basics of the game and in the way that it also gives them exactly what they expect from a 3D platformer. For example, think back to Super Mario 64 or Sunshine and the way in which each level is structured. When you first enter a level, you don't automatically start playing, but rather select a chapter which gives you a hint as to how to obtain the MacGuffin, as well as showing you its general location in the stage. Well, A Hat in Time does this to a certain extent, but once you make it out of Mafia Town, things get pretty mixed up to the point that you really won't know what to expect. Chapter 2, called Battle of the Birds, has you starring in 2 opposing movies that are going head-to-head in an upcoming awards ceremony. In most of the acts in this chapter, you not only go in looking for timepieces, but also earn points for how you play, points that are later added up to determine which side wins the awards ceremony that occurs during the finale of the chapter. Chapter 3, Subcon Forest, takes this a step further by walling off different acts until you find and sign their equivalent contracts, which are hidden throughout the level. Which means, if you want to get all the timepieces in this area, you're going to need to do a bit of exploration rather than just immediately unlocking the next act after selecting it. And Chapter 4, Alpine Skyline, forgoes individual acts altogether in favor of just giving you a large area in which to faff about in. I've also noticed a trend with how long it takes to collect each timepiece as the game goes on. At the beginning, you collect them fairly quickly, which both rewards the player for learning the basics of the game as well as establishing the narrative, but it also means that you'll unlock all the levels fairly early on, which has the effect of making it so that you always have a wide variety of activities to choose from. But as the game goes on, each timepiece takes more and more time to collect, to the point that by the end it might take you 30 to 40 minutes to just get a single one of them. For example, in Alpine Skyline, it took me about 45 minutes to get to and complete the birdcage in order to collect the timepiece, and in that same amount of time I was able to get well over half of the timepieces in Mafia Town. And you might think that extending the length of the game in this manner would become tiresome, but surprisingly, you'd be wrong. At least for me, I found that the later timepieces tended to be much more rewarding and enjoyable to obtain because the path to each of them always seemed to be filled to the brim with fun activities and unique platforming segments, which gives the game a nice lovely upward trend of enjoyment that starts high and ends even higher. Chapters 2 through 4 also have a finale that's unlocked once you complete all of the acts or get all the timepieces up until that point. This is really nice because it gives each of the stages an overarching theme and narrative that's separate from the main story, making each world feel like a natural and meaningful component of the game rather than just a place where stuff happens. It's design choices like these that sets A Hat in Time apart from the games it's taking inspiration from. For one thing, the game isn't concerned with meeting some arbitrary quota of timepieces per level. In fact, if we look at the rundown of each chapter, we see a distribution of timepieces that would probably make someone with OCD's head spin. Mafia Town and Battle of the Birds each have 10, but Subcon Forest has 9, and Alpine Skyline only has 8. This shows that the developers were more concerned with creating engaging challenges that fit naturally within the level rather than shoehorning out of place and afterthought timepieces in just to hit a certain number, and this just isn't something we see very often in the world of 3D platformers. Everything always has to be nice and neat and evenly dispersed, even if it doesn't always make sense. This game has 7 MacGuffins per level. These games have 10. These two have 25, God! And in each of those previously mentioned games, even the ones that I like, there always seems to be a handful of MacGuffins that are just kind of there, like the developers didn't have the time or resources to make a scenario and just kind of stuck them in wherever they'd fit. However, A Hat in Time doesn't do this, and instead every timepiece you get has some event or scenario surrounding it. In fact, even secondary and tertiary items like yarn balls and rift coins get their own little dedicated platforming sections or events built seamlessly into a level, like a separate mountain peak in Alpine Skyline or climbing the tallest tree in Subcon Forest. In a lesser game, these spots would almost certainly be reserved for another one of the game's primary MacGuffins, but A Hat in Time is perfectly comfortable putting in an unnecessary item as the reward instead. And I think this is because the developers were confident enough in their levels that they knew you'd have fun just messing about in the world. They understand that fun doesn't just happen because you're obtaining collectible after collectible, but that it's how you reach the item that matters. And at least for me, I found this to be completely true. The game is just so cutesy, charming, and unique, and it's just so satisfying to move around that I often found myself wandering around aimlessly without any real goal in mind, just faffing about and soaking in the world. And there's a lot to soak in because this game is just filled to the brim with little details and humorous interactions such as dedicated smooch and taunt buttons to kitty cat paintings on a kitty cat wall to warn you of incoming kitty cat shenanigans. Though, this isn't to say that A Hat in Time is without its flaws, because there certainly are a few places where I feel that the ball was dropped, at least a little. Probably the biggest issue I notice is that the game doesn't always do the best job of letting the player know what to do. For example, during the parade level in Battle of the Birds, you're tasked with marching around town with a band following your every move. You start the level on top of a building in the center of town and are told that after you march around enough, a disco ball will drop and release a timepiece. So after marching about town for a while, DJ Grooves asks you to turn on the pyrotechnics using 3 dials. So far so good, but once you activate all 3 dials, the camera zooms in on the very location you started at, complete with the disco ball in frame and a timer counting down and fireworks going off. I took this to mean that the ball was about to drop, so naturally I made my way back to that building, only for... what the hell? So, as it turns out, the game didn't want me to go back to the start, it was just trying to tell me that certain roofs are now hazardous. Oh, okay, well, that's handy to know and all, but having the camera shoot across the map and focus in on a thing is basic video game language for, hey dumbass, go here. I also had a similar issue when climbing the windmill in Alpine Skyline. I got partway up and noticed a yarn ball that I missed below me, so I jumped down and suddenly I took a hit and was put back on the platform I jumped from. At first I thought it was a glitch, since on my way down I couldn't actually move or perform a double jump, so I tried again and oh, I see what's going on here. Since this windmill is so large and climbing it takes like a frickin' hour, I'm guessing the developers put fail states below you once you reach a new layer, so if you fall, you don't have to start back at the bottom. That's rather nice of them, seeing as, yeah, it'd be pretty tedious to fall from halfway up and then have to start all over again, but I think they could have handled communicating this a little better. Like, maybe have Hat Kid open her umbrella and get shot back up on a gust of wind like in Mario 64, or just make the fail states dependent on how far you fall rather than being in a specific location, because the way it is now, I know I've safely landed from higher falls than that. But aside from that, I'm struggling to find anything really wrong with this game. I've heard some criticize its simplistic graphics and voice acting, and yeah, while those aspects aren't phenomenal, they're far from bad. And besides, this is a game about a space-traveling girl with silly hats and a ship made out of wood fighting the mafia and another girl with a mustache. Do we really need top-tier voice acting and graphics card melting visuals? I don't think so. All that said, A Hat in Time is pure joy from start to finish, and it really feels like a game that not only wants to pay homage to the 3D platformers of the N64 and GameCube eras, but also wants to improve upon them without completely reinventing the wheel. And for the most part, I'd say Gears for Breakfast hit the nail squarely on the head, and this is a game that I'll definitely be playing time and time again. This is another one of those games that I simply can't recommend enough. The controls are tight, the world is charming, and the characters are both fun and occasionally terrifying, and overall the game just manages to be funny as hell without having to force a single joke. While there are certainly a few minor problems and missed opportunities, there's nothing particularly egregious, and these certainly don't tarnish the luster of the overall package. A Hat in Time truly feels like the next stage in evolution for the 3D platformer genre, and I cannot wait to see what Gears for Breakfast and other developers come up with next.